Good morning. Waiting. It's one of the hardest things in life. We wait for food at a restaurant, we wait in line to buy things, but we also wait for the results of a medical test. We wait for the good things to come, for the hard things to pass, and for the everyday things to just happen as well. Not all waiting looks the same, but it's all waiting and it's all part of life. In our passage today, we find Joseph in a season of waiting that was brought on because of the actions of another person. And once again, we find Joseph in a situation where his life has been greatly impacted because of the sinful actions of someone else. Earlier in chapter 37, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, and after they were plotting first to take his life. And then last week in chapter 39, we saw how Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph. And when he turned her down, she fabricated a story where she made herself the victim and accused Joseph of making a pass at her. This is where our story picks up today. Joseph has been falsely accused and finds himself in prison. He is suffering because of the actions of another person. His circumstances were completely out of his control. However, Joseph does have a choice about one thing as to whether or not he will be faithful to trust and obey the Lord right where he finds himself. So let's begin in Genesis 40, verse 1. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. Two more characters enter our story, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt. Now, they have greatly offended their master. We aren't 100% sure what this offense was, but they've done something that was bad enough to land themselves in prison. We do know that. And you might be wondering what type of significance these roles played in the king's court and why these two had fallen from grace, if you will. The cup bearer was basically a human poison detector. Okay, just bear with me. Let me explain. He would taste the king's drinks before giving them to him to ensure that no one was trying to kill the king. And so he was quite literally putting his life on the line with every single sip to ensure the safety of the king that he served. Now, the baker oversaw preparing the king's food and needed to be a trustworthy man who would also not try to add a few extra ingredients to try and take the king out. These roles were vital for the safety and the well being of the king, and something happened to make the king question their loyalty. And this landed them both in prison where they crossed paths with Joseph. All right, verse 4. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. We see that Joseph has gained the trust of the guard, so that he has been put in charge of the cupbearer and the baker. And now, while we also don't know the backstory as to why this trust was there, I think we can make some reasonable assumptions that Joseph's character and how he had acted in prison had brought about a level of trust with the prison guard. So God allowed Joseph to once again be placed in a position of leadership so that God's plan might be fulfilled. Let's go back to verse 4. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. So, dreams are back into the mix of our story once again. If you've been with us for a while, you know that this isn't the first time Joseph has had some interactions with dreams. Okay, but each of these dreams carries a meaning of its own for the king's attendants. Let's see in verse 6. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with his master in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" Joseph's noticed something is off with these men. right? He doesn't just ignore it or brush past it or pretend he doesn't see it. He takes time to ask them what might be bothering them. And they say, "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." We see some growth here when it comes to Joseph and the interpretation of dreams. If we remember back to chapter 37, Joseph shared the dreams that he had. Let's read and see what those were. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Okay, so if you remember, if you were here when we studied this chapter in 37, Joseph doesn't stop here. Okay, he goes on to tell his brothers one more dream that he had had, and we can kind of see that he somewhat was lacking in his delivery and timing when it comes to sharing about his dream. His pride was on full display in chapter 37. And it led to his brothers' anger and resentment toward him, so much so that they wanted to take his life. Now, did God still use this situation? Yes. Yes, he did. And God can still use us even in our pride and our sin. But the hope would be that as we grow in our understanding of who God is, that there is change in our actions and our heart condition. Joseph once again finds himself in a place where God will give him the ability to interpret and understand dreams. But this time, his faith is on full display. And we see that Joseph understands where this ability is coming from. In verse 8, he makes God the hero, not himself. This is the growth. Before, with his brothers, Joseph made himself the hero. And that is what got him into this mess in the first place. But as we'll see later in Genesis, Joseph's God given ability to interpret dreams will also be what gets him out of this mess. We see a similar response to the interpretation of dreams from Daniel with King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2. And we're going to read those verses starting in 26. The king asked Daniel, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dreams and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come." Daniel also realizes where his ability came from God and God alone. Both Daniel and Joseph were able to interpret dreams because God gave them the ability to do so, and they both gave him all the glory. Where in our lives are we making ourselves the hero and not God? Where are we taking credit for our abilities when in reality they are God given gifts that we need to use for His glory and not our own? What if we looked at each ability we have through the lens of how we can use it to point others to Jesus instead of trying to show others how awesome we are? It's all about our heart condition. There's nothing wrong with being good at something. The problem comes into play when we use those gifts and ability to elevate ourselves over elevating the gospel. God gave Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. And the point isn't the gift, but the gift giver. Joseph and his ability to interpret aren't the point. Jesus is. First Corinthians 12, 4 through 6 says, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. It's not about the gift or the person with the gift. It's all about the God who is working through the gift. God has given Joseph an opportunity to use the gifts he has given him for his glory. And Joseph is going to be faithful with this opportunity. Now, we don't know Joseph's thought process here, but I do wonder, did he take a minute or a few seconds and ask the Lord to lead his words, to give him the ability to clearly communicate the intended meaning behind these dreams? Do you ever pause and ask the Lord for help with your response? This is something I try to do, and goodness, I wish I was much better at making it a deeply rooted habit, because it can be really easy to just blurt out whatever pops into our mind, isn't it? I had the opportunity to pause and ask for some wisdom just last week. I got a message from a friend of mine who had just received some really hard news. And I found myself in a place where I knew that I needed to respond. But I knew a response in my own humanness was not going to be what she needed to hear. So before I began to speak, I asked the Lord to please guide my words, to speak through me, and to help me know what the most comforting words for the moment would be. My friend and I often send messages through the app Marco Polo, which is, if you've never used it before, it's a way that you can send a video message to other people, and they can actually like jump on the app and be watching you live while you're doing it, or you can listen to it later. And so I opened up this app and I began to record a video to send to my friends. But as I was on there for, maybe 30 seconds, I could see that she had joined me live and was watching what I was saying. So there was no starting over or deleting if things didn't come out as I was hoping that they would. So after I was done, I recorded what I wanted to say, and I reopened the app and I rewatched what I had sent, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, that was not the best. I could have done that way better. I don't think I should have said it that way." And I began to doubt myself. My moment of, "Lord, please use me and guide my words," had turned into a selfish game of, "I should have done that better." I closed the app and thought, "Oh, well, I can't go backwards. At least she knows me really well and she knows my heart." And about an hour later, I got a text from my friend thanking me for the words of encouragement and telling me how much they meant to her. She thanked me for reminding her of how her faith has grown, of how God does not waste our pain or our past trials, because he can use them to prepare us to face something else in the future with a deeper faith and trust. She told me that those were the words her heart needed to hear, and she was so grateful. I was in awe of how, even despite my own doubts and my self focus, that the Lord had answered my prayer and had truly given me the words to say. Oh, how I wish that I was quicker to pause and my response was to ask for wisdom with my words, even when it's not like big life altering hard news that I'm responding to. Because as we're reminded in James 1, 5 through 6, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. I got tossed by the waves of doubt last week. But I'm grateful that even in my sinfulness and doubt, that God can still use me, because I want to be one who is faithful no matter what circumstances I find myself in, because I know the Lord has a plan and his plan is truly perfect. Let's pick back up in verse 9 and see what dreams these two guys had and what they might mean. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were three branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The three branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer." Joseph explains to the cupbearer exactly what his dream means, and then he makes an ask of him. Verse 14. "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Joseph makes a plea for the cupbearer to help right his injustices. He asks a man who he knows will have very close contact with those in power to remember him and to help him be released from prison. As Dan reminded us last week, we can be faithful, but God still allows difficult things to happen. Joseph had no control over where he ended up. It was fully out of his hands, but he could control his actions. He could choose to lean into faith and to trust that God was with him. We don't get to control where we end up in life and the things that happen to us, but we do have a choice over how we'll respond. And whether we choose faith and trust in the midst of where the Lord leads and what he allows to happen. God can give us the ability to be faithful wherever he leads and through whatever he allows to happen in our lives. But do we truly believe that God's ways are best and not our own? Or do we just say that when things don't go our way, or we're trying to, in our humanness, to make sense of a bad situation? Our faith is in God, not in the results or what happens. Faithfulness requires us to willingly say, "Not my will, but yours be done." Jesus was the perfect example of submission to the will of God the Father. And we read about this in John chapter 6. "For I have come down from heaven, not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me." The world will tell us to just hold on, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and to keep going. Just like the band Wilson Phillips said, "Don't you know things will change? Things will go your way if you hold on for just one more day." We don't have to hold on to ourselves or our circumstances. We get to hold on to Jesus and his perfect will. Romans 12:1-2 tells us, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Biblical faithfulness is rooted in a deep knowledge and understanding that God is in control and that he is the hero of the story, not us. Joseph saw an opportunity to ask for help, but he would also have to trust that even if the cupbearer didn't remember him, that he would, when he was released in 3 days, that the Lord was still good, still in control, and still faithful. Joseph needed to say and truly believe to his core, Not my will, but yours be done. So let's get back to our passage again and see what the baker has to say. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. On the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the baskets on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Now, that didn't go quite as well as the first dream, did it? Okay, this guy has a very different outcome coming his way in 3 days. And while we don't fully understand why one had a positive outcome and the other had a negative outcome, we will see that both interpretations will, in fact, come to be. Let's get back to verse 20. Now, the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph has said to them in his interpretation. God had given Joseph the ability to accurately interpret the dreams, each one of them happening just as he said that they would. So this doesn't make Joseph great. It makes the gift giver great. Because on his own, Joseph was just a man who was trying his best to be faithful with where the Lord had him as he relied on the Lord to use, guide, and rescue him. And as we'll see, the Lord was going to keep Joseph in a season of waiting. Verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. The cupbearer had forgotten about Joseph, but God did not. God had a plan to keep Joseph in prison for 2 more years, actually. And while we don't understand why, God had a plan and his plan was best. This happens to us in life as well. We can often question why God allows certain things to happen, or why God allows a challenging season to feel like it's dragging on and on. But the good things and the hard things in life don't happen because we deserve them. They happen because God has a plan and his plan is best. This is God's grace and mercy in action. Even Joseph experienced this. He didn't get what he really deserved because what he deserved was death. And that's what we deserve too. But because of Jesus and his life and his death and his resurrection, we do not get what we deserve. Instead, we get grace. God allows hard things to happen, but they are not without purpose. God, in his sovereignty, allowed Joseph to remain in prison for 2 more years before the cupbearer would finally remember him. And we'll learn about that next week, so I'm not going to give any spoilers. But God had a divine purpose to keep Joseph where he was for 2 more years. Only the Lord understood why. But this is where faithfulness comes into play. We don't have to understand the why. We just have to be faithful in our current circumstances. Because it is in our current circumstances that the Lord could be growing in us a deeper faith and understanding and trust in who he is, so that when the next trial comes along, we can look back and remember his faithfulness to us in the past. Joseph was faithful because God made him faithful. And faithfulness isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It's going to look uniquely different for each of us. So I find myself in a season of waiting. It's a good kind of waiting. but it's still rather unexpected and not what I thought things might look like when I had really thought and dreamed about this several years ago. So I just got hired as a full-time communication studies professor, which is like my dream job. Okay. And something that I've really worked for pretty, I mean, not, not to toot my own horn, but I feel like pretty hard over the last several years as I've been teaching part-time at 3 different college campuses. And let me give you just a little bit of background, especially if we don't know each other well. Teaching is really kind of like a second career for me, and one that took a little while to achieve. So, in order to do what I do now, I had to start all over by going back to school. I decided about 8 years ago that I wanted to pursue teaching. And with that decision, it meant that I had to put my student cap back on and go and work on getting my master's degree. So after 2 years of school, I graduated, and it was time now to look for a job, trying to make this thing happen. And by the grace of God, I got offered a job at the beginning of August, 2 weeks before the semester started in 2021. And after the years, and throughout the years, and the Lord continued to open up opportunities and doors for me, which meant I got to add more schools to my list of employers. And more schools meant more classes. Now, I was really grateful for every single opportunity, but in the last few years, I found myself with a workload of what would be considered a full time job plus a part time job, all rolled into one. And during this time, I waited. I waited for a full time position to become available because that was my ultimate goal. But it turns out those are few and far between when people have tenure and don't quit. So throughout the years, I waited. I applied for 2 different positions that had come up and were available. I made it to the final round for both, only to come up second. And throughout those processes, I had to trust that God was in control. And really, that wasn't where He wanted me to be. And He had something else better in mind. Now, it didn't take away the disappointment and the sometimes frustration of having to wait, but I will say more often than not, it did give me peace. So the waiting continued, and I tried my best to steward the waiting well by taking on the opportunities that the Lord was giving me, and more importantly, trying my very best to be a light with where He had me in the moment. Now, there were times that I was impatient and I wanted to be just at one school because teaching in 3 different places was exhausting. But over the years, I learned that impatient and my impatience was at the debt of my contentment. And even though I had a preference of where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do and what I wanted my job to look like, I had to remember that God was still good. He was still working and He still had a plan. I just couldn't see it yet. So this spring, a full-time position was posted actually at De Anza College, a place that I never thought would be a possibility and where there would be a position available. So I found myself with this new opportunity to be to try and apply. And this spring, I did that. And I need to find myself with this opportunity to be faithful with where the Lord is going to be placing me in September because I got the job. And when I pictured myself as a full time instructor, I honestly pictured and I will admit, even prayed for it to be at a different place, a place where I thought I could thrive and also partner with other believers who already worked there. But this opportunity came up, and the Lord just kept opening door after door after door. And throughout the process of applying, I found myself wondering if this is really where I wanted to be. And along the way, I began to pray that the Lord would change my heart and give me a deeply rooted passion and heart for the students and staff. And that I would move from being unsure to being really excited about the potential opportunity. And the Lord was so faithful to put me in circumstances where I had conversations with my students that built that passion and got me so excited about the possibility. So when the time came to accept the job, I was able to do so with a real deep level of excitement for where the Lord was going to be leading me. He had changed my heart. And as a colleague of mine said when I let him know about my job offer, Ruth, the Lord has believers here, And it's clear that he needs you to be a light there, or else he wouldn't have opened up this opportunity. And that's my prayer, that I would be faithful in a place that the Lord is leading me, whatever that might look like in the fall. My question for you to think about this morning is, what is the Lord asking you to be faithful in? Maybe it's coming to church more regularly or getting involved and starting to serve. Maybe it's getting connected in a community group or meeting one on one with someone to invest in them or have them invest in you. Maybe it's being bold to speak up about the truth of the gospel in your school or your workplace or with your neighbors. Or maybe it's being a person of honesty or someone who thinks of others before yourself. Maybe God is calling you to care for someone, either for their physical needs or maybe their emotional needs. Or perhaps God is calling you to be more intentional in your relationships or to be humble enough to ask for forgiveness and restore a broken relationship. Whatever it might be, may we be people who are faithful because God gives us the ability to be faithful and because he is the point, not us. And when we find ourselves in a season of waiting, may we be people who are faithful because, again, God gives us the ability to be faithful. He's the hero, not us. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for your word, for the truth that we read about this morning as we opened up um, the book of Genesis. God, I pray that we would be people who are faithful with where you've placed us. And God, if we find ourselves in a season of waiting, God, may we understand, Lord, that you have a plan and your plan is perfect. Or Lord, if we find ourselves in a season of challenge and difficult, situations. God, I ask that you would give us the peace and the reminder that you are in control, that you are good, and that your ways are far better than our own. And God, I pray in the midst of those seasons of waiting or challenge, or even the seasons of good, God, that we would feel your grace and your presence and your love in such a deep and tangible way. We pray all this in your name. Amen.